Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will begin with chapter 21, verse 24. Chapter 21, verse 24, a very famous verse in the Torah. Ayin tachas ayin, eye for eye, shein tachas shein, tooth for tooth, yod tachas yod, hand for hand, regel tachas regel, leg, foot for foot. And this is the idea that when one damages another, one has done to the person what they inflicted upon the other. At least that's what it seems to say. If you look at Rashi, Rashi quotes the famous Gemara, Rashi on Pasuk Chav Daled, Ayin tachas ayin, Sime ein chavero, no sein le, no sein lo, dmei eino. If someone were to blind another person, one doesn't get blinded, one pays the value of what it is to have had sight. The manner in which one lessened the financial value of the other person through the injury which they brought upon the other, that is what they have to pay. It doesn't mean literally eye for eye. It means the value of an eye for injuring one's eye. And the Gemara learns this from Sukkim. It's a very famous idea that eye for an eye is not taken literally. The obvious question about this is, if that's not the intent of the Torah, why would the Torah say it this way? And one could give different answers, and the most basic answer is because that's what God decided. But there are different answers to this question. But I just thought it was interesting to see the Sforno. The Sforno is far from the standard answer. It's just an interesting idea. Sforno pasuk Chav Daled, ayin tachas ayin, kach hayara'ui kefi hadin hagamur shehi mida keneged mida. Theoretically speaking, that should be what we would do. That if a person injured another person's limb, they should lose the same limb, because that's how God operates. We talk about it all the time, measure for measure. So if God operates that way, shouldn't we operate that way? Nevertheless, says the Sforno, like Rashi said, the Gemara teaches that it means not that a person pays, rather that a person loses their limb, rather that a person pays. And the reason for that, says the Sforno, is because the lack of our ability to assess. Penisokel maybe will err, v'nosif al hamida la'ashmava, and maybe will incorrectly add to the punishment. So it's a really interesting idea from the Sforno. What the Sforno was saying is, of course, the halacha is one doesn't lose their limb, one pays the monetary value, but the Torah is conveying that one deserves to lose their limb. It really should be a limb for a limb. The only thing is, our ability to get it exactly right is so narrow. Just to give a simple example, two people could break an arm, and their experiences could be very, very different. So let's say a person broke someone else's arm. So what's the solution? Yeah, you're going to break their arm. You're going to break their arm in the exact same way. And if you do you know how their body will react to it? It's impossible. It's impossible to perfectly do it. So therefore, we don't go there. But the Torah is conveying that, theoretically speaking, that would be a correct, interesting idea. Okay, let's go on to chapter 22, verse 2. This is the beginning of the pasuk deals with a technical issue. There's an idea that if a person breaks into a house in the middle of the night, if the person breaks into the house in a manner that it's likely that the homeowner is going to stand up to defend themselves and defend their property, it could be that it's permissible to kill the person. There's various points made here in the pasuk. I don't want to get into that detail. I don't want to get into this. If the sun shines upon the person, there is blood upon the person. Shalem yishalem. If the person is found guilty of theft, they have to pay for the theft. Im ein lo. If they don't have the means of paying for the theft, v'nimkar b'gnei vaso. They should be sold for their theft, which, by the way, is one of the ways that there could be a Jewish slave in the first place. That it's like my parents always told me, be prepared. So if a person steals, they should at least know they've got the money at home to pay the theft. My parents never encouraged me to steal, but theoretically, if a person steals and the item is no longer available to give back, and they don't have the means to pay for it appropriately, then the halacha is the Beis Din sells them, and the rabbinic court sells them as a slave to pay off that which they owe through their theft. And that's taught in the pasuk here. Im ein lo, if the person doesn't have it, v'im kar b'gnei vaso, the person is sold to pay for their theft. Really, really interesting sforno over here. Sforno on pasuk base, v'im kar b'gnei vaso, ki lulei, if not for the fact that a person who stole and didn't have the means of paying back would be sold as a slave, hayurov dalas ha'am ganavim, then there'd be this great temptation for people low on finances to be thieves. Shim yafsidu hagneva o yochlua ein omer hashev. I mean, when you think about it, if a person is low on the bank account, it's going to be very tempting because they'll steal. Maybe they won't get caught in the first place. And even if they get caught, they'll steal something of great value. They don't have the money to pay for it. So what's going to happen to this? Well, don't do it next time. So what's the deterrent? So therefore, says this Sforno, in a context where a person might very well be tempted to just steal when there's no real consequences to pay because they don't have money anyway. Therefore, the Torah creates this deterrent. It's not just money. If you don't have the money, we're going to take you as a slave. Just an interesting thing. Okay, let's move on to verse 20. Another very, very famous pasuk. Do not afflict, meaning verbally, afflict or pressure the convert in different ways. Because you were converts, you were strangers in Egypt. And this is the idea, and this is a very important idea, that if someone is among us is a convert, we're supposed to treat them with the utmost respect, and heaven forbid that we should malign them or speak ill of them in any way, shape, or form because they weren't born into Klal Yisrael. That sentence that I said, I think just made sense. Why does it have to be because you were strangers in Egypt? Who cares? What does that have to do with anything? First of all, it's wrong to do anyway, so just don't do it because it's wrong. And second of all, and therefore, because you were slaves in Egypt or converts in Egypt or strangers in Egypt, then don't be. It seems to be a little bit disconnected. So it's an interesting Ramban over here. Ramban on pasuk Chaf. Kigirima yisem beretz Yisrael. Lo huchsharu kol hagerim bavur hayosenu gerim be'eretz man vein tam shu muvtachim la'olam bavur kain. I mean, the Ramban says, what does that mean? Because there was a certain point in time that we were strangers, so now we have to treat all strangers a certain way. I mean, we should treat all strangers a certain way because that's how we should treat strangers. But what's the connection between the fact that there was an isolated period of time that we were strangers in Egypt? Hu piresh Rashi, ki hutam l'lo sonu oso. We're explaining why we shouldn't speak to them in the wrong way. Yazir shlo sonu oso bonas dvarim. Don't speak in an abusive, disrespectful way to them. Shimhoniso avhu yachol lahono secha v'lomar loch af atami gerim basa mum shabach al tomer lechavercha. So Rashi says the pshat in the pasuk is something or other about kettles and black, and I forgot how the phrase goes, but you know what I'm talking about. In other words, if you have a flaw, don't go criticizing people for that very same flaw. What, you're going to criticize someone for being a newcomer to the Jewish people? Guess what? You all were newcomers in Egypt. Don't talk so much. Maybe they can fire right back at you. That's what Rashi says. Rabbi Avram Amar, Zachor Kigerim Hayisam Kamohu. Rabbi Asa just says, just remember, you were in a similar circumstance. You didn't feel easily included in Egypt. So you have to be extremely sensitive to a convert among the Jewish people for that reason. That's what the Ibn Ezra says. So Rashi says it's watch what you say to who, because same thing could be said to you. Ibn Ezra says that should build your sensitivity. Now the Ramban. I think the pshat is Kiyomar, Lo sona ger v'lo silchatzenu v'tachshavu she'ein lo matzu miyatcha. Ki ato yodato she'yisim gerim beretz Mitzrayim. V'ra'isi es halachatz asher Mitzrayim lo chatzim eschem v'asisi bohem nekama. The Ramban understands the pasuk in a very different way. You know, it's a very tempting thing when a person, by the way, besides everything else, remember, in an agricultural society where the land of Israel was given as an inheritance, a person who has the tremendous conviction and courage of spirit to convert to Judaism, besides everything else, they don't have the land that everybody else has. They certainly didn't inherit it, not in Israel. So let's say a person would be tempted to say to themselves, I can speak to this person however I want, because they're low on the totem pole. Again, this is not the way that we should think or speak in any way, shape, or form, but sometimes we have weaknesses. Let's say a person thinks that way. Says the Ramban, Hashem says back to the person, watch it. Think about your experience in Egypt. What did the Egyptians think would happen to them if they treated you wrong? Did they think there'd be anybody who would save you? Did they think there would be anyone who would stick up for you? Of course not. You were a lowly people. What happened to the Egyptians? So you be careful who you speak that way to. Never assume that a person is too low on the totem pole to be treated with dignity and respect. I see the tears of the people who are afflicted, who there's no one to look out for them. And I save every single person from a stronger hand when people of the greater strength act inappropriately. Okay. Skipping a line or two, elsewhere it says, later in the parsha, you know the soul of the convert because you were converts in Egypt, strangers in Egypt. Klomar, yidatem ki koger nafsho shvala alav u'nyanach b'tzoik ve'enav tamid al Hashem v'yirachem alav kasher richam aleichem. So the same idea that you know that God is there for people who need help. So certainly two very different ideas. Rashi says the idea is don't mock someone for something that could be said about you. The Ibn Ezra says, use your personal experiences to build your sensitivity. And the Ramban says, don't think you're too high on the totem pole to worry about the person lower on the totem pole and how you speak to them. Because I crushed the Egyptians because they treated you a certain way. I'll crush you if you treat people not as established in society a certain way. I think all these things, for one way or another, are very significant to think about. So we discussed this morning Rashi and the Sforno regarding eye for an eye. We discussed the Sforno regarding the idea of selling a person if they don't have sufficient means of paying back for their theft. And we discussed why the prohibition of maligning the convert is connected to the Jewish experience in Egypt.